once again, we're going to visit the Twilight Zone, where Unitarian Rod Serling presents us with lessons using fiction and fantasy. Today, we use an episode from 1960 entitled The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Now, this episode, written by Serling, was broadcast when we were all kind of in fear of the creep of communism. You remember those days? Where many were viewed with suspicion regarding possible associations with the Communist Party. I don't know how many of you were asked to sign an oath sharing that you were not a member. I had to sign one of those for a job of the Communist Party. But I think it's even more relevant today for many reasons. The 5-minute clip I'm about to show you is one that's been edited to include highlights that will give you just enough information that you can see what happened in the show and fill in the blanks with your mind. So come with me and Rod Serling to Maple Street, a quiet, happy neighborhood in the USA.
Maple Street, in the last calm and reflective moment before the monsters came. At the sound of the roar and the flash of light, it will be precisely 6:43 p.m. on Maple Street.
Steve, what was that?
I guess it was a meteor, honey. Came awful close, didn't it?
Much too close. Steve, the power's off. I had the soup on the stove, and the stove just stopped working.
I'll cut across the backyard, see if the power is still on Floral Street.
I'll take a run downtown. Maybe I can get it straightened out. Yeah.
Mr. Brand? Mr. Brand, please don't leave here. You might not even be able to get to town. It was that way in the story. Nobody could leave. They sent 4 people, a mother and a father and 2 kids who looked just like humans. But they weren't.
Car started somehow.
He never did come out to look at that thing that flew overhead. He wasn't even interested.
He always was an oddball.
Yeah, why didn't he come out with the rest of us to look?
What do you say we go ask him? Wait a minute! Now, let's not be a mob.
What's happening?
Well, maybe you better tell us.
How do you figure it started, Les?
The whole thing is just weird.
Well, if that's the case, Les Goodman, then explain why you...
Look, let's just forget it.
Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let her talk. Go ahead, explain what.
Well, a couple of times I've come out on my porch, and I've seen Les Goodman here, standing in his yard, just looking up at the sky. As though he were looking for something.
You scared, frightened rabbits, you. You're sick people, do you know that? And you don't even know what you're starting here, because let me tell you, you're starting something here that's what you should be frightened of.
Yeah, I think maybe everything might as well come out now. Your wife's been doing a little talking, Steve, about some of the odd things you've been doing.
Go ahead. What's my wife said? Let's get it all out. Let's pick out every idiosyncrasy of every man, woman, and child on this whole street. You're all set to find a scapegoat. You're all desperate to point some kind of a finger at a neighbor.
Well, there's no need getting so upset, Steve.
It's the monster. It's the monster.
What a shotgun. Will somebody think a thought around here? What good is a shotgun?
Don't talk, Steve. You're gonna talk us right into a grave. You let whatever's out there walk right over us, wouldn't you? Well, some of us won't.
It's Pete Van Horn.
Charlie, you killed him.
How was I supposed to know who he was?
Didn't know.
Charlie? Charlie, the lights just went on in your house.
It's Bob Weaver's house!
It isn't Bob Weaver's place. It's Don's house.
What's the matter with you people? Now stop!
understand the procedure now? Throw them into darkness for a few hours and then sit back and watch the pattern. They pick the most dangerous enemy they can find, and it's themselves.
Then I take it this place is not unique.
By no means. Their world is full of Maple Streets. And we'll go from one to the other and let them destroy themselves.
The tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices. For the record, prejudices can kill, and a thoughtless, frightened search for a scapegoat has a fallout all of its own. And the pity of it is that these things cannot be confined to the Twilight Zone.
Now, why do I say that this is even more relevant today than it was in 1960? Well, first of all, the events occurring in that neighborhood of 1960 were only possible through some supernatural or superterrestrial invasion of aliens. But today, with our interconnectivity, via the computerization of almost every tool, appliance, and vehicle we use, the possibility actually exists for mass blackouts, both in power, communication, and transportation, leaving us figuratively and literally in the dark. And when we are in the dark without connection to others, we become fearful and frightened. And then we do some mighty stupid things sometimes. But it doesn't really take a massive blackout to turn us into Maple Street monsters. It's being done now through more minor cyber attacks that confuse, frustrate, and throw us into confusion about what's real and what's not. And because these attacks just require smart 20-somethings with lots of Red Bull to keep them up and working, it's cheap and can be done by nations large and small. These are some of our own cyber terrorists. I wonder why they have to wear camouflage. These are some U.S. cyber, they wouldn't call them terrorists, cyber warriors, excuse me. Some of our cyber warriors. So it can be done by countries large and small, terrorist groups, corporations, and yep, even your neighbor on Maple Street. I'm going to change that last sentence because it not only can be done by these groups and individuals, it is being done. Our intelligence has verified, of course, that the Russians are indeed interfering already in the 2020 elections. And for sure, we can see once again that those of us involved in political parties have to be conscientious not to fall into turning on one another as we promote our preferred candidates. The candidates themselves are having a hard time not doing that. We know what the end result will be if we continue to tear one another apart. We know that. Indeed, the Joker was right when he said, we stopped checking for monsters under our bed when we realized they were inside us. Within humanity, not some alien force. Now we do our best not to feed those monsters. We come here. We come here to learn and worship and fellowship together and to feed the goodness within ourselves. But that nurturing of goodness cannot be neglected. And we need to be careful not to be led astray and look for monsters in the wrong places. As Marty Kaplan says in his analysis of this episode of The Twilight Zone, he says, the monsters aren't low-income pregnant women and mothers who can't afford adequate nutrition for their families, or sick Americans who can't find health insurance to cover them, or blue-collar workers who want to retire at an age when there's still some life left in their bodies, or students who can't afford college without Pell Grants, Or people who think their government's job includes preventing their air and water from poisoning them. They're not the monsters. He says, sitting on the hilltop, watching Americans turn one another into bogeymen, like those aliens were doing, evading scrutiny and responsibility are the real sources of our distress. Well, who are they, Marty, these monsters? Here are some of the ones that he describes and identifies for us. He says, they are the big bankers who've extorted trillions of public treasure, blowing up the deficit while awarding themselves inconceivably fat bonuses. He says, they're the billionaires who benefited from a massive transfer of wealth from the middle to the top, and whose political puppets protect them from paying their fair share of taxes. Now, of course, I know these, not all bankers, not all billionaires, but a lot of them, right? They're the corporations whose cash has convinced Congress to deregulate industry after industry, despite all the evidence that it is the enforcement of rules, not the magic of the marketplace, that protects the public's rights. And they are the defense contractors and pork appropriators who use the cover of national security to shield the Pentagon's budget and its procurement process from the cuts and reforms that even Republicans like the Secretary of Defense are advocating. And they are the front groups and propagandists like Freedom Works and Fox, who use class warfare and culture wars in order to turn Americans against their own economic interests. And they are the Supreme Court justices, not all of them, but the Supreme Court justices whose Citizens United decision, that decision overthrowing a century of settled law, has made our campaign finance system into an open sewer. And of course, there are many more monsters that we have to watch out for and to work to diminish, if not defeat. What are we to do about the monsters within us and others? Dr. Sarah Sabzali has a TED Talk that was very helpful to me on that, and you can look that up and watch it. She believes that when we can change our stories, we change our lives, and she works tirelessly with her clients to help craft a new narrative of health and wholeness. And the story she shares on this particular TED Talk relates to defeating our inner monsters, those inside us. Starting with Combo, an imagined monster in the basement of her childhood home. Now, when I was growing up, my parents and grandparents would talk about the boogeyman or the sack man, and my granddad used to go outside and put a sack over his head and stand at the window to kind of scare us, so we go to bed, the sack man. Well, many families had these kinds of stories, and in her family it was Combo that was lived down in the basement. And Dr. Sarah takes us on a short journey to explore then. She turns that into a metaphor to explore how basements stand for many of the unknowns in our lives. And like Combo, many of us carry inner monsters in the basements of our mind that we need to better understand and confront. So she gives us some hints about what that might be. What is the monster in your basement? We all have them. She says it could possibly be one of these, and maybe I've modified some or added them. She says it could be a fear that you have failed your children or your students, or that you're staying busy, so busy because your relationship is failing, or that despite your efforts to love everyone, there are folks you just hate. Or perhaps despite the mask of success inside, you are scared. Or that no matter how much good you do as you serve, you are still kind of empty. Or that you lose patience way too much with others, and you are afraid of what that will lead to. Or perhaps it's a beast made of the combination of these or others and more, just waiting to throw you into despair. Dr. Sayre says that to diminish and defeat these monsters, we have to train for it. It doesn't automatically come natural. We have to train for it and be ready. And for that, she believes we need 2 special ingredients. The first she says that we need is courage. Courage. You have to have the courage to admit, you have to first admit that these monsters are there. To look down in the basement and admit that they're there. Courage comes from the Latin cor, meaning heart. So it relates to your feelings. We should recognize our fears and our other feelings, our anxieties. Step into them and through them. We may even find that some of our monsters are not so scary, like that nightmare that the little boy let out of his closet. There may be some that after we face them, we can look at and say, maybe this is just a part of my identity that I can tuck into bed with me, you know? But unless we face them and look at them, we don't know. But we can't do it alone, she says, and I agree with that. It's too hard. It is too hard to face those monsters alone. And that's where the second ingredient comes in. And that is connection. Connection. We need a powerful circle of support to address our inner monsters. We need friends. We need allies. We need family, either our real relatives or family that we adopt. Family that we adopt. And sometimes we need professionals to help us as well. Therapy is a good thing. But why should we bother? Why should we bother? I know folks, and I've been one of them sometimes, who just live up on the top floors and just don't pay attention to what's down there. You know? Just let that stuff start rotting and smelling till it gets too bad. Right? But what you don't heal, folks, you pass on. You pass it on to others. In fact, most of us have inherited monsters along with the ones we create. We carry them up here on our shoulders, don't we? Sometimes I turn into Miss Mattie, my grandma. She comes in, it comes through. I see that coming. Sometimes I want to pull her up. But we've inherited some of those. So how can we face our inner stuff and defeat the external monsters as well? We have to have connection, and we have to keep working. We have to keep coming back to each other. Keep coming back to those friends, family, allies, groups that help us, those connections. I know that I have found a special place myself within Unitarian Universalism and my congregations for defeating my own monsters and working with others to defeat those in our society. This is a good place. This is a place where our values and our fellowship can provide the connections we need and the courage that we need. And I know that I need it, and I'm so appreciative for it. Now, there are others that need us too. Folks who have been rejected from other connections or who just can't deal with the hypocrisy that is present in so many institutions. Let me admit that we are not perfect here. We have our problems. We have our own monsters that come on up and that we have to face and deal with. But this congregation does provide a sanctuary away from some of the monsters in society. And it's a place where we can ready ourselves to confront them and to confront the monsters within. In Rod Serling's closing narrative, he said, "Prejudices can kill, and suspicion can destroy, and a thoughtless, frightened search for a scapegoat has a fallout all of its own. For the children and the children yet unborn, I've really been thinking about that the last couple of weeks because I've had my little great-grandchild with me. And you think about what kind of world are we leaving for these children, these young children. And then he follows along and says, and the pity of it is that these things cannot be confined to the Twilight Zone. We have to stay woke, folks. Have to stay woke. Don't feed the monsters. It's so tempting to, especially if you're on social media and you see those comments, you want to go back in and just feed that monster some more, make it even worse, you know. I've done it, and I go back and erase it, you know. Don't feed the monsters. Instead, let us nurture the hope, nurture the goodness, and let us look for the love. It is there, even in some of those relatives that we have a hard time with and others. Some love is there if we look for it. Look for the love. You know that song that we sing sometimes? There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. Maybe some of it's right here. Sing that with me. There is more love right here. There is more love right here. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love right here. Maybe it's in us and me. There is more love in me. There is more love in me. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love in me. May it be so, folks. May it be so.